Greetings, dear subscribers and casual listeners of my channel. To many fans of Harry Potter, James and Lily Potter remain eternal symbols of love, sacrifice, and resistance against darkness. But what happens if we set aside the romantic lens? Let's try to look at James and Lily without rose-colored glasses and perhaps rethink our view of these iconic characters. Enjoy watching. Number 1. Overrated legends. Despite countless praises from others, we rarely see James and Lily in action. Their presence exists mostly in flashbacks and second-hand memories. While they've become mythic figures in Harry's story, their actual narrative arc in the books is surprisingly thin. Almost everything we know about them is filtered through others' words and assumptions. Rather than deeply developed characters, they often feel like figures wrapped in a veil of idealization. Number 2. Lily. Too perfect? Lily is often portrayed as the embodiment of virtue. She's smart, beautiful, compassionate, talented, all in one. But is that even realistic? Her character is constructed so flawlessly that she seems more like a statue than a living, breathing person. Her flaws and mistakes are either hidden or ignored. Even when James's flaws are acknowledged, Lily remains untouchable and immaculate, which for some readers makes her feel boring and unconvincing. Number 3. Were they truly talented? Both of Harry's parents are said to have been outstanding witches and wizards, but where's the proof? Yes, Slughorn called Lily a genius, but he was also known for flattering his favorites. As for James, he's credited with helping create the Marauders map, but how much of that was truly his doing? If even Peter Pettigrew managed to become an animagus, perhaps James's achievements aren't quite so rare. Talent isn't just about reputation, it's about deeds. And in this regard, James and Lily's records in the books are surprisingly modest. Number 4. Was Lily truly kind? Snape, despite his dark side, was deeply loyal to Lily. Their friendship fell apart when he called her a mudblood in anger, and while his remorse was real, Lily never forgave him. Understandable. But she wasn't perfect either. When James bullied Snape, Lily mostly stayed on the sidelines. Even more surprising, she later married the same person who had tormented her friend. That doesn't exactly scream kindness or forgiveness. If anything, it hints at indifference or even arrogance. Number 5. James, no real regret. When Harry saw glimpses of his father's past, he was shocked. James came across as a boastful bully, mocking peers just to feel superior. Though Sirius and Lupin claimed James grew out of it, we never see him apologize to Snape or try to make amends. His so-called growth is spoken about by others, not shown through his actions. He seemed to live the rest of his short life confident in his own righteousness, and that's questionable. Number 6. Their love story, a mystery. The romance between James and Lily often feels more like a fan fiction plot than a believable love story. For most of their school years, Lily openly despised James's behavior. So what changed? When did she fall for him? And why? The books barely touch this transition. Some readers believe there was never real attraction, that Lily's feelings may have been a mistake. Or perhaps her story is far more complex and layered than we've been led to believe. Number 7. Where were her friends? James is always seen surrounded by loyal friends, Sirius, Remus, Peter. But Lily? Apart from Snape, a former friend, and a few vague mentions of her popularity, we see no close companions, no loyal confidants, no mourners like James had. That imbalance raises questions about her portrayal as beloved by all. Maybe that image too is just part of the legend. Number 8. James was a bad father. James Potter died a hero. That's what the world remembers. He died trying to protect Lily and Harry. But is dying the same as being a good father? We never saw James raise his son, never heard him speak to Harry, never watched him face the sleepless nights, the fear, the patience that fatherhood demands. He was brave, yes, but bravery isn't the same as responsibility. James loved action. He loved being the center of the storm. In school, he was a Quidditch star, a prankster, a leader, but fatherhood isn't a battlefield. It's quiet, repetitive. It's showing up every day without applause. Would James have traded the adrenaline for diapers and lullabies? Would he have stayed in hiding while others fought? Or would he have sought the war again, letting Lily carry the weight of their family? In the Philosopher's Stone, Hagrid tells Harry, "Your mum and dad were as good a witch and wizard as I ever knew." But that's legend, not memory. That's what people say about the dead. The truth is, we don't know the kind of father James would have been. He died young, in a flash of noble sacrifice. But real fatherhood isn't a flash. It's a lifetime, and James never got that far. Maybe he never would have wanted to. Number 9. Lily could have prevented the tragedy. When Severus Snape learned that Voldemort was hunting the Potters, he went to Dumbledore, not for James, not for Harry, for Lily. In the Deathly Hallows, he begs, "Hide them all. Keep her, them, safe, please." But that desperation came too late. Lily had already cut him out of her life. She had made it clear his choices, his friends, and especially the word mudblood were unforgivable. And maybe she was right. But what if she had listened just once more? Snape was slipping deeper into darkness, but he had one fragile connection left. Lily. He loved her more than anything. If she had reached out even briefly, even just to ask what he was doing, maybe he would have turned back sooner. Maybe he would have warned her before the prophecy reached Voldemort, before Peter betrayed them, before it was too late. But she didn't reach out. She let silence speak for her. And that silence cost her everything. Lily wasn't responsible for Snape's choices, but she closed a door that might have saved her life. She could see who he was becoming. But instead of fighting for the boy she once knew, she gave up on him. And that small decision, one moment of final rejection, changed the course of history. Sometimes tragedy doesn't come from cruelty. It comes from not giving someone one last chance. Number 10. James was a coward during school years. James Potter always had the image of a fearless Gryffindor. Captain of the Quidditch team, confident, bold, admired. But when we finally see him in action during his school days, it's not bravery that defines him, it's cruelty. In the Order of the Phoenix, Snape's memory shows a different James. Surrounded by Sirius, Remus, and Peter, he hexes Snape for fun, laughs as Snape struggles, shows off because a group of girls is watching. That's not courage, that's performance. He wasn't alone when he picked a fight. He had his gang, a built-in audience, and Snape was always the target. Not because Snape was a threat, but because he was alone, easy, vulnerable. James liked to win, and it was safest when the odds were stacked in his favor. He didn't fight battles, he staged them. He needed applause more than he needed justice. And somewhere in that arrogance was fear. Fear of not being noticed, of not being loved. Remus Lupin admitted it himself. He said they were young and thoughtless. Sirius, too, brushed it off, telling Harry that Snape was being his usual greasy self. But it wasn't harmless. It left scars. And when Harry watched that memory, he felt shame. "I'm not proud," he told Sirius and Lupin. "That speaks volumes." Even Harry, who idolized his father, couldn't look away from the truth. James wasn't a villain, but he wasn't the hero everyone claimed either. Not back then. Maybe he grew, maybe he changed. But the boy who bullied others to feel powerful, that boy wasn't brave. He was afraid of being invisible in a world that demanded greatness, and that fear, masked with a wand and a grin, looked an awful lot like cowardice. Number 11. Their marriage was rushed. James and Lily were only 21 when they died. That means they married and had a child while barely out of school, in the middle of a war. In a world crumbling around them, they clung to each other like lifelines. Maybe it felt like destiny, maybe it was fear, the kind that pushes people into decisions just to feel alive, just to feel in control of something, anything. We're told they were deeply in love, but the books never show how that love grew. In the Order of the Phoenix, Sirius tells Harry, they started going out in 7th year. That's hardly time to build a lifelong bond. 1 year of romance, followed by marriage and parenthood, before they'd even found out who they were outside of school. It was fast, too fast. And when people move that quickly, they often don't stop to ask the hard questions. They were surrounded by death, friends dying, families hunted, the future uncertain. Of course they rushed into love. Of course they needed something to believe in. But was it real, lasting love, or just the illusion of safety? A temporary comfort in the chaos of war? Lily had just ended her friendship with Snape. James was finally getting what he had always chased. It's possible neither of them were thinking clearly. Their love story is painted as noble, tragic, eternal. But maybe it was just young love, trapped in desperate times, not wrong, not fake, but rushed, unfinished, and built on the hope that love alone could save them. It didn't. Number 12. Lily made a selfish choice with Peter. The choice of Peter Pettigrew as secret keeper remains one of the most tragic decisions in the wizarding world, and yet no one ever questions Lily's role in it. Everyone assumes it was James or Sirius who made the call. But Lily was no bystander. She was intelligent, opinionated, and fiercely protective of her family. So why would she agree to let Peter, a man she barely knew, hold their lives in his trembling hands? Sirius Black later admitted the switch was last minute. In The Prisoner of Azkaban, he says, I persuaded them to use Pettigrew instead. I thought it was the perfect plan. But persuasion doesn't work without agreement. Lily could have said no, could have insisted on Dumbledore, on Remus, on herself. Instead, she trusted a shadow, someone whose loyalty had never been tested. It was a moment of dangerous optimism, or worse, selfish convenience. Perhaps she didn't want to be the one to say, this man is weak. Peter wasn't just a mistake. He was a disaster waiting to happen. Even Sirius suspected something. Even Remus, in his quiet doubt, wondered. But Lily, the brilliant witch, the mother who would later throw herself between her son and Voldemort, she didn't act. She didn't ask the hard questions. That decision, that silence, cost them everything. It wasn't just misjudgment, it was carelessness disguised as trust. Lily is remembered for her love, her sacrifice, but before she died she made a choice that led Voldemort straight to her front door. That's not easy to reconcile with the image of a perfect heroine, but real people are never perfect, and maybe Lily Evans, for all her virtues, made the most human mistake of all, believing in someone she barely knew because it was easier than facing the truth. Number 13. Lily looked down on her own family. Lily Evans was the girl who could do no wrong, kind, smart, courageous, the shining symbol of everything good. But behind the warm smiles and soft voice was something less talked about: pride, especially when it came to her family. Her sister Petunia Dursley may have been bitter and cruel later in life, but she wasn't always that way. In The Philosopher's Stone, we hear Petunia say bitterly, "My sister got a letter just like that and disappeared off to that school, and came home every holiday with her pockets full of frog spawn, turning teacups into rats." That line is more than jealousy. It's the voice of someone who was abandoned. Petunia was not just jealous, she was hurt. She watched her younger sister be chosen for something magical, something she could never be a part of. Lily never tried to bridge the gap. Not once in the books does she write to her sister, visit her, or try to explain the world she now belonged to. She cut her family off like they were part of a life she had outgrown. Her new world was dazzling, and she embraced it completely. Petunia was left behind, not by accident, but by Lily's decision. There's a telling moment in the Deathly Hallows when we see a memory of young Petunia begging Dumbledore to let her come to Hogwarts. "I want to go to Hogwarts as much as Lily does," she wrote. She wasn't evil. She was a girl desperate not to lose her sister. But Lily laughed it off. She dismissed her sister's pain as petty jealousy. Even when Petunia called her a freak, Lily didn't react with kindness or an attempt to understand. She simply turned away. She let the gap grow until it was too wide to fix. Number 14. James risked his friends for fun. They were only 15 when they started breaking one of the most complex magical laws in existence. James Potter, Sirius Black and Peter Pettigrew secretly became animagi, unregistered shapeshifters, just to accompany their friend Remus Lupin during his painful transformations into a werewolf. To some, this is an act of friendship. But look again, this wasn't just about loyalty. It was a game, an adventure, a thrill James couldn't resist. Becoming an animagus was no small feat. It was dangerous. One mistake and the transformation could become permanent or deadly. The Ministry of Magic heavily restricted it for a reason. Yet James, confident and charismatic, pushed forward. "He was the best in our year at everything," Sirius once said in Order of the Phoenix. That brilliance made him reckless. He convinced 2 teenage boys to risk their lives, their sanity, and possibly the lives of others. Why? So they could sneak out of the castle under the invisibility cloak and roam the forbidden forest with a werewolf. Sirius could handle it. He was bold like James, but Peter, he was the weak link, a boy desperate for approval. He never had the strength to resist James, and it was Peter, the least equipped of them all, who ultimately crumbled. Years later, he betrayed the Potters to Voldemort. The marauder bond, forged in thrill-seeking and rule-breaking, shattered under real pressure. And it all started with those early nights of running wild beneath the Whomping Willow. Remus, years later, reflected on that time with quiet unease. In Prisoner of Azkaban, he told Harry, "They did something extremely dangerous, something that was forbidden. It took them the best part of 3 years to work out how to do it." But did James ever think of what he was really asking of them, of what would happen if Peter couldn't control the transformation? Number 15, they could have joined the dark side. It is a truth too often ignored in the heroic tales of the wizarding world. Good and evil are rarely born. They are shaped, cultivated by choices, surroundings, and sometimes by sheer coincidence. When one considers the legacy of Lily and James Potter, the couple whose deaths marked the beginning of Voldemort's fall, one imagines unshakable virtue, unwavering loyalty, and heroic sacrifice. Yet under closer inspection, the cracks of possibility shimmer beneath the surface. What if the Potters had chosen differently? What if, in another world, under different stars, Lily Evans and James Potter had joined the ranks of the Dark Lord? James Potter was not born a saint. In his school years, he was not the paragon of humility or compassion. The boy who strutted through the corridors of Hogwarts with Sirius Black at his side bore more resemblance to a spoiled prince than a future martyr. "Messrs. Mooney, Wormtail, Padfoot, and Prongs," proclaimed the Marauders' map, "are proud to present." Their legacy at Hogwarts was one of cleverness, defiance, and pranks, but also of cruelty. Snape never forgot, nor did others. He hexed people for fun, as Severus once sneered. James's disdain for authority was not the quiet resistance of a rebel with a cause. It was the laughter of someone who had never known consequences. From duels in the hallways to public humiliation of classmates, there was a sense of entitlement in his magic. He didn't simply defeat Snape by the lake, he humiliated him, dangling him upside down, exposing him to the laughter of their peers. Lily had shouted, "Leave him alone!" But her voice was an isolated protest in a sea of cheers. How close was James to embracing that thrill, the intoxicating rush of power? One can't help but wonder what might have happened if Tom Riddle himself had extended an invitation to the young Potter. Would James have refused? The Dark Lord was not blind to talent. He sought the brilliant and the bold. Bellatrix Lestrange, once the pride of the House of Black. Barty Crouch Jr., the perfect student with a secret hunger for darkness. Lucius Malfoy, polished and persuasive. Is it so far-fetched to believe Voldemort might have seen potential in James, cocky, powerful, and already disdainful of weakness? And then there was Lily, the golden girl with the emerald eyes whose kindness was legendary. But kindness is not immunity from influence. Lily Evans was Muggle-born, yes, but her heart was forged in the fires of emotional turbulence. Her sister hated her. Her best friend fell into the darkness, and she walked the tightrope between Gryffindor valor and Slytherin ambition more than most care to admit. Slughorn, the ever-watchful alchemist of influence, adored her. "One of my all-time favourites," he told Harry. Lily was not just talented, she was charismatic. She had the power to move hearts, and hearts, when wounded, do not always stay on the side of light. If Lily had not distanced herself from Snape after the infamous Mudblood incident, perhaps her path might have twisted. For a time, Severus and Lily had been inseparable. He called her the brightest witch of her age. If he had successfully lured her toward his dark friendships, had she been welcomed into the circles of Rosia, Mulciber, or Avery, what choices would she have made to protect him, to belong, to survive? The influence of friends cannot be overstated. Imagine a world where Lily remained loyal to Severus Snape, and through him became acquainted with the Dark Lord's followers. James then, a boy desperate for recognition, for her approval, might have swallowed his pride and followed her into the dark. Would they have become Voldemort's favourite young lieutenants, rising swiftly through the ranks, their reputations carved in blood? The tragedy of Regulus Black proves the line is thinner than it seems. Raised in the pure blood traditions of his family, Regulus joined the Death Eaters out of duty. But when confronted with the truth, when he saw the cruelty behind the charm, he turned. He stole the Horcrux. He sacrificed his life. He was not evil. He was misguided. Could James not have been just as misguided had he grown up in the House of Black instead of as a privileged heir in Godric's Hollow? Even Dumbledore once noted that the line between light and dark is treacherous. It is our choices, Harry, that show what we truly are, far more than our abilities. And choices are fragile things, often influenced by pain, by friendship, by fear. Consider Sirius Black. He and James were brothers in all but blood. Sirius rejected his family's darkness, but what if he hadn't? What if James, desperate to keep Sirius close, followed him into shadows rather than the light? The Gryffindor house is not immune to ambition. Peter Pettigrew, after all, wore the same colours as Lily and James, and Pettigrew's story is perhaps the most haunting of all. He idolised James, he followed him like a shadow. But when the tides turned, when survival was at stake, he betrayed them all. Perhaps he was weak, or perhaps he merely saw a different opportunity, one where his name might finally be remembered. And isn't that what James craved in his youth? To be remembered, the night Voldemort chose the Potters was not inevitable. He had choices too. Dumbledore knew it. The prophecy does not mean he is the only one, he warned. Neville could have been the chosen child. The Longbottoms could have died that night. And in that world, who knows what path the Potters would have taken in their grief, in their desperation. A name that often goes unspoken in this discussion is that of Slughorn. His love for talent was not always paired with moral clarity. He collected students like trophies. Lily was one of his prized possessions. Had he groomed her for a different destiny? Had he introduced her to the right people, flattered her ambition? Who is to say she would not have accepted a different invitation? Number 16. James never respected Lily's wishes. James Potter, the golden boy of Gryffindor, has long been idolized as the embodiment of youthful charm and bravery. Yet behind the glimmer of Quidditch triumphs and daring marauder escapades lies a relationship often romanticized but rarely scrutinized. His pursuit of Lily Evans, eventually his wife and the mother of Harry Potter, is frequently portrayed as a love story that conquered all odds. But what if we peel away the nostalgia and look closer at what Lily truly wanted, and whether James ever truly listened? From their very first interactions at Hogwarts, it's clear that Lily Evans was a girl of principle. She valued kindness, intelligence, and justice, values that put her at odds with the boy who pranked others for amusement and bullied her closest friend, Severus Snape. In Harry Potter and the Order of the Phoenix, Snape's memory offers a glimpse of James at 15, levitating his rival upside down and publicly humiliating him without provocation. When Lily intervenes, defending Snape, James sneers, "Evans, don't make me hex you!" His response wasn't one of remorse or understanding. It was dominance. He wanted to own the moment, not listen to her concerns. That moment reveals everything. James wasn't interested in Lily's perspective. He wanted her attention, her admiration, and he was willing to get it by force if necessary. Lily had repeatedly shown disinterest in James throughout their school years. In the same memory, she calls him an arrogant tourag. This wasn't playful banter, it was frustration. Lily didn't enjoy being the prize in his endless games of attention, and yet James continued. He asked her out publicly, relentlessly, even when she said no. This persistence is often painted as romantic in the wizarding world, a testament to never giving up. But in real life, and in honest analysis, this is emotional pressure. Lily wasn't flattered, she was tired. We never see a turning point from James where he reflects on Lily's boundaries. Instead, we hear from Sirius Black in Order of the Phoenix that James matured in his 7th year, stopped hexing people for fun, and became head boy. But is this truly proof of change, or just a new way to win Lily over? It's telling that James's maturity coincides with his pursuit of Lily, taking a new form, more subtle, more socially acceptable. Yet the underlying goal remained. He wanted her, and he was still determined to get her. By the time Lily agrees to date him, readers are left with a curious lack of context. What changed? Did James apologize? Did he seek to understand her values? Or did Lily, after years of being chased, finally surrender out of exhaustion? The text is silent here. There's no moment of real emotional reconciliation shown in the books. We are merely told that they got together. It raises the question, was Lily's acceptance of James's love an act of compromise rather than conviction? Lily's principles never seemed to align with James. Her friendship with Snape, though later shattered, was rooted in deep empathy. Even after Snape joined the Death Eaters, part of her still believed in the possibility of redemption. James, on the other hand, was quick to judge, quicker to act, and often fueled by pride. He wanted to be the best, the bravest, the most admired. In a way, Lily became another trophy, a beautiful, brilliant girl who said no to everyone, but eventually said yes to him. Was that James's greatest win? In Deathly Hallows, when Harry visits Godric's Hollow and sees the gravestone of his parents, we feel the tragedy of lost love. But even there, Rowling does not give us any scene from their adult lives that proves James had changed in how he treated Lily. We're expected to believe he became a devoted husband and father, yet no memories or accounts show him prioritizing Lily's desires or choices. It is always about how he loved her, not how he respected her. The way James treated Severus Snape further illustrates this blind spot. Lily had made it clear that she despised bullying and valued kindness, and yet James's hatred for Snape never diminished. He never apologized to Lily for humiliating her friend. Even in his final years, there's no indication that James tried to repair what he broke between Lily and Snape. A man who truly loves someone listens to what matters to her. James dismissed it. In fact, in The Prince's Tale, one of the most emotionally charged chapters in the entire series, we see just how deeply Lily's values were wounded. She ended her friendship with Snape not because James won her heart, but because Snape called her a mudblood. Her pain was rooted in betrayal of principles, not romantic drama. Nowhere in that chapter does she say, James changed her mind. Nowhere does she celebrate his growth. The story of their love is told more through absence than presence. It's also worth noting that Lily was the only girl in the Marauder's orbit with her own voice. She was not a side character. She had goals, ideals, and a firm understanding of what was right and wrong. But once she entered James' life romantically, her voice began to fade from the narrative. She became James' wife and Harry's mother. The individual Lily, the one who stood up to injustice, who challenged everyone including her closest friends, disappeared into a domestic role. Did James allow space for her independence, or did he expect her to mold into the role he desired? Even in small ways, James often seemed more invested in how Lily made him feel than how she felt herself. In Order of the Phoenix, when Snape snarls, "Your father was a swine," Harry defends James instinctively. But we, the readers, are left to wonder, was Snape bitter because James stole Lily's heart, or because James never once tried to understand her world? Number 17. Lily used James to forget Snape. It was never truly about James, some whisper. It was always about the boy who called her mudblood, the boy with greasy hair, an awkward posture, and a desperate longing in his dark eyes, the boy she once called her best friend. In the storm of Hogwarts hallways, amidst curses and duels, potions and charms, Lily Evans and Severus Snape shared a bond that felt too deep to name, but perhaps it was too twisted, too scarred by betrayal, to ever survive. Lily and Severus grew up side by side in the shadowy suburb of Spinner's End, a place where dreams seemed to decay before they even began. Magic, for them, was an escape, a golden promise. Lily, with her vibrant hair and fierce spirit, discovered her gift in wild bursts of accidental magic. Severus watched in silent awe. It was he who told her she was a witch. It was he who first said the word Hogwarts. And so it began. Their friendship was forged not at Hogwarts, but long before it, on cracked sidewalks and beneath trembling street lamps. She defended him against her sister's scorn. He offered her knowledge of a world far bigger and brighter than Cokeworth. But what began in innocence slowly shifted into something darker. At school, their paths began to diverge. Lily joined Gryffindor, Severus, Slytherin, and with those banners came pressure, identity, expectation. Still, she tried to hold on. She pleaded with him about the people he surrounded himself with, Mulciber, Avery, those who wore their cruelty like medals. But Severus, wrapped in his need to belong, dismissed her fears. When he called her mudblood in the corridor, it wasn't just a word, it was a breaking. It was the end of something sacred. I don't need help from filthy little mudbloods like her, he shouted, wand-drawn, surrounded by sneering Slytherins and laughing onlookers. Lily stood, stung, humiliated. "Fine," she said, her voice ice. "I won't bother in future, and I'd wash your pants if I were you, Snivelus." But it wasn't just about the word. It was about a pattern. It was about feeling that the boy who once defended her now defended the very ideologies that hated her kind. Severus apologized, begged her to forgive him, but Lily didn't just see an insult, she saw a choice. And he hadn't chosen her. Years later, the world would remember Lily Evans as James Potter's wife, but even that image, so bright in the photographs, her red hair against his dark mess, baby Harry between them, was not without its own shadows. James had once been arrogant, dismissive, cruel even, especially to Severus. Lily saw that too. "You think you're funny," she snapped at James in Order of the Phoenix, during a flashback into Snape's worst memory. "But you're just an arrogant, bullying toe-rag, Potter." It wasn't love at first sight. James had to change. Or pretend to change. He had to shift from the arrogant prankster to the loyal, selfless warrior. Some say he did. Others say Lily simply needed someone to believe in. Someone who wasn't Severus. After all, Lily didn't immediately start dating James after cutting ties with Severus. There was a space there, a quiet ache, a time of transition, a time where Lily might have tried to erase the pain Severus left in her heart. She wasn't naive. She knew James was flawed, but maybe he was safe. Maybe he was a way forward. Imagine her sitting alone in the common room, long after curfew, the fire crackling low. Her thoughts drifting back to Spinner's End, to a boy who once looked at her like she was light itself. But now, that light had scorched her. She could never go back. And perhaps she didn't truly want James. Perhaps she needed not to want Severus. Some fans argue that Lily's shift to James was too sudden, too convenient, that it came not from a burning romance, but from emotional exhaustion, from the need to feel valued. James, by their 7th year, had grown into a more responsible figure, head boy, brave, loyal, devoted. He adored Lily. He would have done anything for her. Maybe that kind of love is seductive when your heart has been broken in a place so deep no spell could reach it. Dumbledore once told Harry, "You are protected, in short, by your ability to love." And perhaps Lily's ability to love had once been tested so fiercely with Severus that by the time James came along, she had nothing left to fight with. Maybe she simply surrendered. When Lily married James, was it with a heart bursting with joy, or with a quiet hope that this path would be easier? She had seen what Severus chose. She had seen the way he clung to the dark arts, to pure-blood ideology, even as he claimed to love her. What could she build with that? And yet, Severus never stopped loving her. His Patronus, a silver doe, mirrored Lily's. Years after her death, Dumbledore asked, "After all this time?" And Snape replied, "Always." A single word, heavy with the weight of unspoken years. A word that still brings readers to tears. But did Lily know? Did she feel that devotion? Maybe she did. Maybe that's why she ran from it. To love Severus meant pain. It meant sacrifice. It meant forgiving too much. James offered admiration, laughter, a future that felt brighter. She could picture a life with James, but with Severus? There was too much blood on the floor, too many words that couldn't be unsaid. Sirius Black once described James to Harry. "Your father would have risked everything for people he loved." And he did. He died trying to protect Lily and Harry. But what if Lily's love for him was never as deep as his for her? What if it was gratitude dressed as love, safety mistaken for passion? Consider this. What if the only reason Lily agreed to marry James was because he wasn't Severus? What if every time she saw James's messy hair and cocky grin, she reminded herself, this is not the boy who betrayed me? Number 18, Lily, didn't understand the world she lived in. She was brilliant, kind, and fiercely loyal, but there was a tragic flaw in Lily Evans Potter. Despite all her wisdom and compassion, there were moments in her life when she acted as though she couldn't see the shadows inching closer. She believed in the best of people so fiercely that she sometimes lost sight of the darkness spreading around her. And in that blindness, she sealed her own fate. It was 1976, and the wizarding world had already begun to fracture. Murmurs of a dark force rising were no longer rumors whispered behind shelves in Diagon Alley. People were disappearing. Families were waking up to find their names written in smoke. Blood status had become more than a topic of impolite conversation. It was turning into a sentence. Yet Lily walked the corridors of Hogwarts with a light in her eyes, holding textbooks and hope, unwilling to believe that the world she loved could turn so cruel. And perhaps nowhere was her refusal to see the storm clearer than in her relationship with Severus Snape. She clung to a version of him frozen in time, the scrawny, awkward boy who had first spoken the word mudblood not with hatred, but with the stunned horror of a child discovering the cost of fitting in. Even as his robes turned darker and his circles grew more sinister, Lily held on to the memory of a boy who used to make flower petals dance in her palms. "You're calling someone a mudblood?" she had cried, eyes flashing with wounded disbelief in Harry Potter and the Order of the Phoenix when Snape tried to justify himself. "I suppose that's a matter of opinion," he said coldly. But to Lily it wasn't. It was a line drawn in blood, and yet even then she hesitated to sever their bond completely. She believed, perhaps naively, that this was a phase, that Severus would return, that he would remember who he had been when they used to run through the fields together, chasing butterflies instead of curses. But the boy with dreams of greatness was being devoured by something older and more terrible than schoolyard pride. The truth was that Lily never truly understood the world she lived in, not because she was ignorant, but because she refused to be cynical. She was a Muggle-born girl in a world that was beginning to choke on its own hatred. And though she had every reason to be wary, to put up her guard, she still tried to fix things with kindness and fierce words rather than strategic action. While James Potter, Sirius Black, and Remus Lupin were preparing to fight, joining the Order of the Phoenix and risking their lives, Lily was still writing to Severus, trying to understand him. She begged him to stop seeing people like Mulciber and Avery, boys who thought dark magic was a game. "They're not your friends," she said. "You're just used to them." But Severus wasn't listening, and Lily didn't realize how far gone he already was. Her inability to see the danger wasn't just limited to Snape. She failed to grasp how deeply the ideology of Lord Voldemort had taken root. Even in Hogwarts, students like Bellatrix Black, Rodolphus Lestrange, and Evan Rosier weren't hiding their beliefs. They boasted of their bloodlines, they whispered about the purity of magic. And still, Lily believed that education and dialogue could save them. She lived with her head just slightly tilted toward idealism, even as others were learning how to cast the Cruciatus curse behind closed doors. Dumbledore, who saw everything more clearly, tried to warn her. Not directly, but through his actions, through the way he formed the Order, through his tireless work behind the scenes. Yet Lily remained, to some extent, removed from the urgency. She was willing to fight, yes, but she didn't anticipate how personal the war would become. She didn't believe that one day someone would point a wand at her baby. It's easy to paint Lily as a martyr, and in many ways she was. Her sacrifice created the magic that shielded Harry from Voldemort, but before she was a symbol, she was a woman who couldn't quite accept that the world around her was crumbling. She still believed that love would be enough, that if she just reached Severus's heart, something would change. "You disgust me," she had told him during their final confrontation, but even then her voice shook, not with hate, but with heartbreak. And there's something quietly tragic in that, because by the time she understood the full weight of the war, it was too late. She and James were hiding. They were being hunted. And the boy who once shared chocolate frogs with her on the train had whispered her name to a dark lord who would come for her child. Snape's guilt would burn for years, but Lily never lived to see his regret. One might argue that her idealism was a form of strength, that the world needs people who believe in second chances, but idealism without realism is dangerous, especially when evil is not theoretical, but rising. Lily thought the world could be reasoned with. She thought her voice would matter more than the system grinding toward blood and fire. The tragedy is not just that Lily died. The tragedy is that she died still believing she could save someone who no longer wanted saving. She looked at Severus Snape and saw the past, when she should have looked at him and seen the future he was choosing. A future soaked in blood, cloaked in hoods and marked by skulls in the sky. When she walked into hiding, she left behind not just her friends, but also her illusions. It was only then, when she held Harry in her arms and listened to whispers of betrayal, that Lily Evans Potter may have truly seen the world as it was. And even then, she responded not with wands, but with love. Her last act was not to fight, but to shield. "Not Harry, please not Harry," she said, not because she was naive anymore, but because love had always been her first language. Still the question remains, should she have acted differently? Should she have seen sooner that kindness would not stop Voldemort? Should she have given up on Snape long before he chose the dark mark? Some would say yes. Some would say that Lily's refusal to abandon her hope cost her everything. Others would say it's what made her human. There's a strange mirror in her story, and that of Narcissa Malfoy, another mother who, in the end, put her child before the Dark Lord. But Narcissa knew exactly what kind of world she lived in. She manipulated it to save Draco. Lily, in contrast, thought the world would be better than it was. And so she was caught unprepared, standing between a madman and her infant son with no spell strong enough to stop what was coming. Her story is often told as one of glory and sacrifice, and it is. But it is also a story of quiet, painful misjudgment. She misjudged Snape. She misjudged the reach of Voldemort's ideology, and she misjudged how quickly a schoolboy's game could become a genocide. When she met James, she was finally given the tools to fight, but even then she wasn't ready to let go of the dream that things could be fixed without war. Even her decision to forgive James for his earlier arrogance speaks to that longing. She believed people could change. And James did. He grew, matured, became a leader. But for every James there was a Regulus, a Rabastan, a Snape, boys who didn't grow up fast enough to stop their descent. Lily's strength was in her empathy. Her weakness was in believing it was universal. Dumbledore once said, "It is our choices, Harry, that show what we truly are, far more than our abilities." Lily chose compassion, but compassion in wartime is a fragile shield. It must be tempered with judgment. She didn't lack bravery, she lacked timing. She didn't lack intelligence, she lacked calculation. She was a heart in a world ruled by knives. Perhaps the reason Lily's story haunts us is not because she was perfect, but because she was not. She was all the things we want to be, kind, loyal, loving, but she was also blind when she most needed to see. She represents what happens when good people wait too long to fight back, when we believe love alone can stop a war. And in the end, maybe it can. Her love saved Harry. Her love broke the darkest curse, but by then she was gone, and the boy she tried to save would spend the rest of his life walking the line between vengeance and grace, between his father's laughter and his mother's mercy, between light and shadow, because she never warned him that the world could be this cruel. If she had lived, what might she have told him? Would she have finally admitted that the world was not what she'd hoped? Would she have taught him to forgive Snape, or to fear him? These are the questions history leaves us, and perhaps that is why her portrait hangs silently in the shadows of the wizarding world, not speaking, only watching, because Lily Potter, for all her brilliance, was never ready for the world she lived in. And that is her tragedy. Number 19. James was obsessed with being a hero. James Potter, for all his fame as Harry's father and a member of the Order of the Phoenix, was a boy who carried an obsession far greater than most ever realized, an obsession with being seen as a hero. In his youth, James wasn't content to simply be liked or admired. He needed to be revered. This wasn't heroism in its truest form, rooted in humility and sacrifice. Rather, it was a hunger to be the brave one, the powerful one, the one who would be remembered not just for what he did, but for how daring and noble he appeared while doing it. And nowhere is this more evident than in his behavior during his Hogwarts years, especially when it came to Severus Snape. It's not hard to find examples of James's bravado. In Harry Potter and the Order of the Phoenix, Chapter 28, Snape's Worst Memory, we are given a direct window into James's teenage self. There, Harry witnesses a memory where his father and Sirius Black humiliate Snape in front of a crowd of students. James, lounging under a tree by the lake, acts not as a protector, but as a showman. "Who wants to see me take off Snively's pants?" he jokes, wand in hand, while students laugh and Snape struggles. The image is uncomfortably clear. James didn't step in to save anyone. He was the aggressor. He was performing. That memory, so vivid and cruel, pulls back the curtain on a version of James that many prefer to forget. It wasn't bravery that motivated his actions in that moment. It was a thirst for validation, a desire to shine in front of Lily Evans and his friends. James's actions seem less about justice and more about dominance. He wanted to be the center of the story, the hero in everyone's eyes, even if it meant casting someone else as the villain, even if that villain was an awkward, unpopular boy who hadn't attacked anyone yet. To be fair, Hogwarts was a breeding ground for inflated egos, and James wasn't the only one caught up in self-image. Sirius Black, his closest friend, shared many of these traits, but Sirius's rebellion had a darkness to it, a rage against his pure-blood family, a bitterness he never shook off. James, on the other hand, acted like he owned the castle, Quidditch captain, top student, adored by teachers and girls, and he was used to winning. Yet it wasn't enough. He needed his victories to be witnessed, applauded. That's why, even when he saved Snape from the werewolf in the Shrieking Shack, a moment that could have been redemptive, he made sure everyone knew about it later. We must ask what kind of person risks their life to save someone and then uses that act to gain favor with the girl they like. According to Sirius in Order of the Phoenix, James only saved Snape because he didn't want someone's death on his conscience. "He didn't think you should be killed," Sirius says to Harry. It's hardly the mark of a noble knight. It's a bare minimum reaction to a situation that James's own best friend caused. Even Remus Lupin later admits in The Half-Blood Prince that James was an arrogant young man. The question then arises, did James ever truly change? Was his sacrifice for Lily and Harry at Godric's Hollow a continuation of his hero fantasy, the final act in a play he had rehearsed his whole life? Or was it the moment he became a real hero, stripped of performance, facing death for love? After all, no one saw that final act. There were no classmates, no professors, no audience. Just a father standing between Voldemort and his child, wandless, hopeless, but willing. It was not a gesture born from vanity. It was the ultimate surrender. Yet even here, the shadow of his past looms. Would James have done the same had he not spent years cultivating the identity of a protector? Did the myth of James Potter, brave, bold, brilliant, shape his final decision more than the reality of the situation? Or was it simply love, pure and human, that transformed the boy who bullied Snape into a man who died on his feet? Lily Evans, the only person who ever truly challenged James's self-image, saw through his arrogance early on. In the infamous memory, she calls him out directly. "You think you're funny, but you're just an arrogant, bullying toe-rag, Potter." Her words slice through his act with brutal honesty. And it's only after this confrontation that James begins to change. He matures, we're told, he grows up. But what does that growth look like, and how much of it was shaped by his desire to win Lily rather than a true moral reckoning? There's a tragic irony in James's obsession with heroism. The real hero in his story, the one who consistently put himself at risk out of love and loyalty, was not him, but Severus Snape. Snape, who was once his victim, later spends years protecting James's son, driven by guilt, grief, and a promise. Snape never claimed the title of hero. He wore no mask, he sought no applause. And in that humility, he perhaps became more of a hero than James ever was. That comparison haunts the legacy of James Potter. Harry himself is forced to reconcile these two images of his father, the gallant man he's always been told about, and the smug teenager he sees in Snape's memory. "I just never thought I'd feel sorry for Snape," Harry says. That sentence reflects a seismic shift in perception. For if Snape, the antagonist of Harry's childhood, could be pitied, then who really was the hero? And yet, none of this is to say James was irredeemable. He was young, he was flawed, but he loved fiercely. He chose to stay and fight when he could have run. That counts for something. Still, we cannot ignore the pattern of behavior that preceded it, and the need to be admired, the tendency to turn every moment into a spotlight, the way he used power not always to protect, but to impress. The Marauders, James, Sirius, Remus, and Peter, created their own myth at Hogwarts. They were legends, pranksters, warriors. But for James, the myth was not just a game. It was a role he clung to. He wasn't content with being brave. He had to be seen as brave. That distinction is crucial. True bravery is silent. It does not demand recognition. It acts when no one is watching. James's early bravery, by contrast, came with an audience. Even his relationship with Lily bears traces of this obsession. He chased her not only because he loved her, but because her acceptance validated his transformation. Her love was proof that he had become the man he pretended to be. It's telling that we hear very little about their courtship, only that he changed, and eventually she agreed to go out with him. We're left to wonder, did James truly grow up, or did he just grow more skilled at hiding his pride? Peter Pettigrew's betrayal casts another shadow. If James was so perceptive, such a leader, why didn't he see it coming? Why entrust the secret of his family's location to someone as fragile as Peter? One could argue it was loyalty. But perhaps it was also blindness, the kind that comes from living in a story where you are the hero and your friends are unshakable allies. Real life doesn't work like that. Real heroes question, protect, and act with caution. James's trust, though touching, proved fatal. And what of his legacy? Harry is raised with tales of his father's greatness, most of them told by men who loved James or wanted to believe in him. Dumbledore, Lupin, Sirius, they all offer fragments of the man, usually tinted with nostalgia. But even these memories are incomplete. They do not show us a hero without flaws. They show us a boy who was gifted, brave, and reckless, and who, in his final moment, found the strength to be more than just a legend. And there's something profoundly human in James's story. He represents the struggle between who we are and who we want the world to see. He reminds us that people are not one thing. They are 1,000 moments stitched together. Some of James's moments were ugly, some were glorious, but taken together they make him real. The hero he dreamed of becoming was always just out of reach, until the night he faced Voldemort. That night, for once, there were no cheers, no trophies, no onlookers, just death and courage and love. That was the moment James stopped acting and started living the truth of who he wanted to be. Even so, it's fair to ask, had he survived, what kind of father would he have been? Would he have taught Harry to walk away from fights, to choose kindness over pride, or would the old James, in the one who duelled for attention, have re-emerged? The answer, like so much of his story, remains unclear, but in the end, perhaps that's what makes James Potter such a fascinating figure. He wasn't perfect, he was vain, impulsive, and sometimes cruel. But he was also capable of immense love, fierce loyalty, and sacrifice. His life was a journey from illusion to truth, from hero worship to heroism, from boy to man. And maybe, just maybe, that final transformation, quiet, uncelebrated, and brave, was what made him a hero after all. Number 20. Their death is romanticized too much. James Potter died first. It was quick, they say. He didn't have his wand on him when Voldemort burst through the door of their hiding place in Godric's Hollow. A fraction of a second, a blink, and he was gone. Lily died next, standing between the Dark Lord and her son. Her last act was a refusal, a mother's scream, a flash of green light and silence. For many, this is where their story ends, martyrs of love, icons of sacrifice. But the truth, as it often is in war, is more complicated. Behind the tragedy lies a tapestry of flawed choices, ignored warnings, and misjudged trust. James and Lily Potter are remembered as symbols. Dumbledore himself called their love the kind of magic that leaves a mark. But symbols, by their nature, strip away detail. They simplify, they romanticize. What we often forget in the glow of their legacy is the chain of missteps that led to their death. These weren't perfect saints caught in a storm. They were young, brave, but fallible. And it's that fallibility we must understand, not to dishonor their memory, but to learn from it. Let's begin with Peter Pettigrew, a friend, a marauder, a coward, hiding in plain sight. The Potters trusted him with their lives, literally. He became their secret keeper under the Fidelius charm, holding the location of their hiding place in his soul. But they were warned. Sirius Black, James's best friend, had suggested himself as the secret keeper. He was the obvious choice, and James knew that Voldemort would come for Sirius first. It was James who proposed switching to Peter, a decision both he and Lily agreed on. Peter is too weak for Voldemort to suspect, James argued. He was right about that. But he failed to ask the harder question. Was Peter strong enough to resist? Sirius would later scream in Azkaban, haunted not just by the loss of his best friend, but by the knowledge that he had supported the switch. "I as good as killed them," he told Harry. in The Prisoner of Azkaban. It was guilt, speaking, yes, but also truth. A chain of well-intentioned decisions, each logical in its own right, but collectively fatal. Peter betrayed them for fear, for survival, and perhaps, somewhere deep in his twisted heart, for power. In the Goblet of Fire, he kneels before the resurrected Voldemort and says, "My lord, you have no idea. I was so alone. I did not mean to." But he did. And he had time to think, time to choose, time to whisper their address to the Dark Lord. But blame cannot be placed solely on Peter's shoulders. The Potters made a fatal miscalculation in isolating themselves with so little backup. They had allies, the entire Order of the Phoenix, Albus Dumbledore, Minerva McGonagall, Remus Lupin. They chose secrecy over support. Perhaps it was pride. Perhaps it was fear of spies. The First Wizarding War was rife with betrayal, and trust was a dangerous luxury. But isolating oneself in war is not safety. It's surrender in slow motion. There was also the matter of Remus. A loyal friend, and yet, in those final months, he was kept at arm's length. Doubted even, according to Sirius, they suspected Remus of being the traitor. "They thought I was the spy," Remus admitted in The Half-Blood Prince. They cut him off. Alone and mistrusted, Remus grieved with the weight of being rejected by the only family he had left. The Potters made decisions based on fear and mistrust rather than open confrontation. It was a mistake. James was brave. No one would deny that. He was also arrogant, a trait he never fully outgrew. In his youth, he hexed Severus Snape unprovoked, laughed about it, and strutted around the school like a prince. By the time Harry was born, he had mellowed, grown. But arrogance can linger in subtler forms, overconfidence in one's judgment, in one's chosen circle, in one's plans. Lily, brilliant and fierce, saw through that arrogance when they were students. She challenged it. "You're just an arrogant, bullying toe-rag, Potter," she snapped in the Order of the Phoenix's memory sequence, and yet she loved him, deeply, wholly. But love doesn't erase flaws, it simply accepts them. The moment they placed their faith in Peter, the die was cast. But what of Dumbledore? He knew Voldemort was hunting the Potters. He had suspicions about Peter. Why didn't he intervene? Perhaps he did not know they had switched secret keepers. But the fact remains, the Order had intelligence, warnings, and a pattern of disappearances, and still the Potters died. A collective failure wrapped in individual choices. Even the choice to go into hiding was reactive, not strategic. Voldemort had already marked them. The prophecy had been made. "The one with the power to vanquish the Dark Lord," said Sybil Trelawney in the Order of the Phoenix. And yet the Potters did not flee the country. They did not move. Frequently they settled, they waited, and death found them. To teach this story only as one of sacrifice is to teach a half-truth. Their deaths are often spoken of as a crescendo of love, an ultimate act of protection. And that's not wrong. Lily's decision to stand between her son and Voldemort did create the magical protection that saved Harry's life. But the tragedy did not begin in that moment. It began months earlier with each misstep, each missed opportunity. It is easier to remember them as martyrs, to think of them as perfect. But that removes their humanity. James and Lily were 21 years old, children really, caught in a war that devoured innocence. They made decisions under pressure, in fear, with hope. But not all those decisions were wise. The romantic narrative helps us cope, it gives us comfort. They died for love, we say. But they also died because trust was misplaced, support was refused, and danger was underestimated. That doesn't lessen their courage, it simply places it in a fuller context. Take Harry, for instance. He grew up idolizing his parents. Who wouldn't? In the Sorcerer's Stone, he clings to the mirror of Erased, watching James and Lily smile back at him. He had never known a quieter or more peaceful moment in his life, Rowling wrote. That longing shaped him. But Harry, as he grew older, learned the truth. He saw his father's cruelty to Snape. He learned the complexities of war. He realized that even heroes have shadows. Lily's choice to protect Harry, even when offered a chance to step aside, was undeniably heroic. Voldemort's own words in the Goblet of Fire reveal this. She needn't have died. She was given the choice. But we must not let that one shining moment eclipse all the moments that led up to it. Her strength lay not just in sacrifice, but in the life she lived. The values she stood for, the mistakes she made, and the lessons those mistakes can teach. Sirius romanticized them too. They were the best people I ever knew, he told Harry. But grief colors memory. He never had the chance to see them grow older, to make more mistakes, to become flawed adults. To Sirius, they were frozen in time, noble, youthful, perfect. And perhaps that's why he, too, remained trapped in the past. We do them no favors by deifying them. Their legacy deserves more than pedestal worship. It deserves examination. It deserves honesty. The war was not won through perfect people making perfect choices. It was won through the messiness of loss, the bitterness of betrayal, and the stubbornness of hope. And what of the lesson for us? That heroism is not a shining sword. It is often a patchwork of intentions, doubts, and consequences. To honor James and Lily is not to blind ourselves to their flaws, but to let their story remind us even the best of us can fall, not because we lacked love, but because we forgot caution. There is a beauty in their love, yes, but there is wisdom in their mistakes. Number 21, they weren't ready to be parents. The world was falling apart, and yet there was laughter. A wedding blooming like a wildflower in a field of war. James Potter, bold and arrogant, with that perpetual gleam in his eyes, had finally married Lily Evans, the brilliant Muggle-born who had once despised him. There was joy in their union, certainly. But there was also haste. Too much haste. Voldemort was rising, his mark stamped into the sky above broken homes. Friends were dying. And amid all this, they made a decision that would shape not only their lives, but the fate of the wizarding world. They chose to have a child. Harry James Potter was not born into peace. He was not born into protection. He was born in the middle of a war where the enemy didn't just kill, he tortured, mutilated, and destroyed entire bloodlines. Voldemort had already slaughtered the McKinnons, the Bonuses, the Prewetts. Still, James and Lily stayed. Not just stayed, they stayed in Britain, in Godric's Hollow, like stubborn soldiers refusing to retreat, even as the battlefield consumed everything around them. Dumbledore, wise and weary, had warned them. The Order of the Phoenix was dwindling. There were spies everywhere. Even trusted friends could be traitors. And yet James and Lily made no attempt to leave the country, to vanish into a corner of the world Voldemort hadn't yet touched. They believed in their safety. They believed in the Fidelius charm, believed in Peter Pettigrew. That belief was their undoing. It wasn't foolish to love their son. That love was the purest thing about them. But love alone is not a shield. It doesn't ward off killing curses. It doesn't interrogate friends who seem nervous or evasive. It doesn't protect a child sleeping in his crib when the front door is blown off its hinges. James and Lily were too young to see this, 21. Barely out of school. And still they became parents, not with a plan, but with hope. Hope in the middle of terror. Sirius Black, who knew James better than anyone, once said, The world isn't split into good people and Death Eaters. But for James, it might as well have been. He never matured beyond the bold Gryffindor who hexed Snape for fun. His courage was unquestionable, but courage without caution is just recklessness. That recklessness followed him into parenthood. Lily had always been the more grounded of the two. Even in school, she had tried to pull James toward humility. She loved fiercely, that much is clear. But she trusted Dumbledore's systems too completely. She put her faith in spells and secrecy when what her child truly needed was escape. The Potters had enough gold to disappear. Why didn't they run? When Voldemort began targeting children of prophecy, there were two possibilities: Harry and Neville Longbottom. The Longbottoms were auras trained for battle. They reinforced their defenses, built wards, and continued fighting. The Potters, however, went into hiding, yes, but they did it only after being directly warned by Dumbledore that Harry might be the one Voldemort would choose. Before that, there was no urgency, no sense of the storm about to crash through their windows. The choice of Secret Keeper was their gravest mistake. Sirius Black offered himself, naturally. He was reckless too, but he was loyal. He would have died before betraying them. But James, ever the strategist, thought he was being clever. He thought, if Voldemort comes for Sirius, he'll never suspect Peter. And Lily agreed. That fatal miscalculation cost them everything. Peter Pettigrew, weak and trembling, cracked under pressure like glass beneath a giant's foot. We have to ask, were they equipped at their age with their personalities to make decisions of that magnitude? Parenting isn't just love, it's sacrifice, it's foresight, it's paranoia when necessary. But James and Lily still believed in the world they remembered from Hogwarts, where danger was a game and laughter could banish darkness. That belief died with them. Even their final night reveals a lack of preparation. James didn't have his wand when Voldemort arrived. He ran to hold off the Dark Lord with his bare hands. Why was his wand not at the ready? Why wasn't there a backup plan? "Lily, take Harry and go," he shouted. But that cry came too late. There were no defensive spells, no traps, no escape routes, just panic and love. The spell that saved Harry, the ancient magic of a mother's sacrifice, was not something they planned. It wasn't strategy, it was desperation. Lily stood between her baby and death because there was nothing else left. And in that moment her love accomplished what all their decisions could not. It protected Harry. But it came at a cost that should never have been paid. Dumbledore himself later admitted, "Perhaps we all put too much faith in the wrong people." He was speaking of Peter Pettigrew, but the statement could extend to James and Lily's choices. They had time to act differently. Voldemort did not kill them in their first month of hiding. There were weeks to relocate, weeks to reassign the Secret Keeper, weeks to build contingency plans. None of that happened. Some argue they were misled by their own bravery. James had always charged into danger. He led the marauders through the Forbidden Forest, through curfews, through duels and pranks that bordered on dangerous. Lily believed in the good in people. She forgave Snape once, after all. But these traits, admirable in a schoolboy and schoolgirl, became liabilities in war. After their deaths, Harry was left not in the care of close friends like Sirius or Remus Lupin, but on the doorstep of the Dursleys. Petunia, who despised magic, Vernon, who feared it. The reasoning, according to Dumbledore, was the blood protection that Petunia's home provided. But we must ask, if James and Lily had made firmer plans, would it have come to that? The truth is, they had no will, no guardianship documents, no written instructions, nothing. It was as if they believed they'd survive no matter what. They were so certain they would defeat the darkness together. But Voldemort was not an opponent. One defeats with optimism. He was cold, calculated, and relentless. and he knew their names. We cannot ignore the way Harry suffered as a result. The cupboard under the stairs, the loneliness, the abuse. He grew up with no photos, no stories, no understanding of who he was. Everything he learned about his parents came second-hand, from Hagrid's awkward comments, from Lupin's wistful sighs, from Sirius's shattered recollections. James and Lily left him a legacy. Yes, but no map to navigate it. In the Goblet of Fire, when Harry meets his parents' shades in the graveyard, they tell him, "Your mother's love protected you. He couldn't touch you for years." That protection was unplanned, reactive. It was not the result of careful parenting. It was an instinct, raw and beautiful, but too little too late for a boy who would grow up without their arms around him. Even in The Order of the Phoenix, when Harry sees the photograph of the original Order, he doesn't recognize many faces. "That's your dad on the left," Moody says. "He looks just like you." But looking like someone is not the same as knowing them. James and Lily may have died heroes, but Harry lived as an orphan because their heroism was never tempered with caution. Their story remains tragic, yes, but also cautionary. It shows us the difference between love and preparedness, between passion and protection, between youth and wisdom. Harry's survival was a miracle, but it should never have had to be one. They could have left. They could have hidden better. They could have trusted differently. And perhaps in a world without Voldemort, their parenting would have blossomed. But they chose to bring life into a world on fire, and they paid the price. Because James and Lily were not ready for parenthood, not in a war, not surrounded by betrayal, not with enemies who could read minds and rip apart families. They loved Harry, that much is beyond doubt. But love, as we now know, was not enough. Number 22, they forgave Sirius too easily. In the echoing silence that followed the death of Lily and James Potter, when the dust had barely settled on the rubble of Godric's Hollow, a name was whispered like a curse, Sirius Black. It was he, they said, who had betrayed his best friend. It was he who had handed over the Potters to Voldemort, serving as their secret keeper. And it was he who had destroyed Peter Pettigrew and 13 Muggles in one street-shattering spell. No one questioned it. Not Dumbledore, not Remus Lupin, not even those who had fought shoulder to shoulder with Sirius in the Order of the Phoenix. But there is something deeply unsettling when we revisit the tragedy with adult eyes and hindsight. If the Potters switched secret keepers at the last minute, if Sirius was not the one entrusted with the secret, why did he not know that he had been replaced by Pettigrew? Why had James not told him? This is where the first fissure appears in the golden myth of the Marauders. We like to think of James and Sirius as inseparable, more brothers than friends. "Sirius was the best man at our wedding," Lily once wrote in a letter to Sirius himself. And yet, in the moment of greatest peril, James seems to have chosen to not trust Sirius with vital information. And worse, if this lack of communication was deliberate, it may have doomed them all. When the Fidelius charm was cast, it was meant to be the ultimate protection. One person, the secret keeper, would hold the location of the Potters, and not even Voldemort could retrieve it unless the secret keeper willingly gave it away. Everyone assumed Sirius would take that burden. It made sense. He was James's closest friend, a trusted ally in the war. Even Dumbledore expected this arrangement. But something happened that changed their minds. In Harry Potter and the Prisoner of Azkaban, Sirius tells Harry, "Peter was weak, he was a poor choice, but James and Lily would have died rather than go into hiding without the charm. I convinced them. I persuaded them to use Pettigrew as secret keeper instead of Mimi." Sirius's version of the story paints his decision as selfless, even strategic. He believed Voldemort would come for him first. He wanted to mislead the enemy, but then why didn't James inform Sirius that the charm had been successfully performed with Peter? Somewhere in the chaos of those final weeks, a terrifying possibility emerges. James did not fully trust Sirius, at least not enough to share the final decision. This was not the act of a man entirely at peace with his choice of confidant. It suggests doubt or fear, or a deeper suspicion that had grown unspoken between even the closest of friends. And Sirius himself admits he didn't know they had already cast the charm with Peter. That's not just a slip in communication, that's a devastating, lethal gap. Lily too must have been aware of this decision. And perhaps we may never know she hesitated. She was always the more perceptive one. She had seen the darkness in Snape's heart long before James had. Could she have sensed a change in Sirius? Could she have worried about the ever-present recklessness that made Sirius as dangerous as he was loyal? It is one of the great ironies of the series that the tragedy may not have been the betrayal itself, but rather the tangled web of half-truths and assumptions that preceded it. A single conversation, one honest, vulnerable conversation, might have prevented it all. If James had told Sirius, "We've chosen Peter instead," maybe Sirius would have protected them another way. Maybe he would have seen through Peter's trembling disguise. Maybe Voldemort would never have found them, but the silence remained. And in the aftermath of their murder, when Sirius appeared laughing in the wreckage of Pettigrew's faked death, the wizarding world didn't stop to ask questions. Azkaban's gates swallowed him whole. 12 years passed. Then came the truth. Not from Sirius himself, his voice silenced by time and torment, but from a broken photograph in the Daily Prophet showing a rat perched on the shoulder of a young wizard named Ron Weasley. Peter Pettigrew lived, and suddenly everything cracked wide open. We know what happened next. Sirius escaped. He found Harry. He nearly murdered Peter, then and there, but was stopped. In the shrieking shack, surrounded by ghosts of the past, Sirius and Remus confronted the truth. "You sold James and Lily to Voldemort," Sirius roared at Peter. "Do you deny it?" But when it was all over, when Peter escaped once more and Sirius fled into the shadows, something even stranger happened. The memory of betrayal between James, Lily, and Sirius was brushed aside like dust on a shelf. Sirius became a godfather again, not just in name, but in role. Harry came to trust him. Remus welcomed him back. Even Dumbledore, who had never visited Sirius in Azkaban, treated him again as a member of the Order, and yet none of them ever fully explored that moment of silence. Why didn't James tell him? It's a question that has festered in the corners of fan discussions for decades. Was it pride? Was it a growing distance between the Marauders after years of war? Or was it something more disturbing, that James doubted Sirius's loyalty in his final days? There are hints of this fracture in the text. In Order of the Phoenix, Sirius is portrayed as emotionally unstable, aggressive, haunted by his past. Even Harry notices this. He looked like someone who had spent too long in a place where hope was just a joke. But what if this descent began before Azkaban? What if Sirius had already been unraveling and James, desperate to protect his family, sensed it? If we follow this thread, the Potter's forgiveness becomes even more tragic. When Sirius re-entered the lives of their son and his friends, there was no reckoning, no accounting, no reflection on how such an epic misunderstanding had occurred. Harry never asked, "Why didn't you know who the secret keeper was?" He never pressed. And Sirius, perhaps too ashamed or too broken, never offered an answer. That silence is a thunderclap. It allows us to imagine a version of events in which the Potters feared the worst of Sirius, but never said it aloud. A world in which Lily, who was known for her fierce intuition, did not trust him in those final days, but couldn't bring herself to tell James. A world in which Peter Pettigrew succeeded not through cunning, but because those who could have stopped him were caught in a maze of denial and pride. "I thought he was the secret keeper," Remus says bitterly in Prisoner of Azkaban. "I thought it was Sirius who betrayed them." The truth is, so did everyone else. Because no one asked the deeper question, why did Sirius not know? And this is why the swift redemption of Sirius Black feels so painfully unresolved. His innocence is not in question. He did not betray the Potters, but his ignorance of their decision haunts the entire narrative like a ghost. We cheer for his reunion with Harry, we weep for his death in the Department of Mysteries, but we never escape the fact that James and Lily hid something from him. And he never got to ask them why. Perhaps that's the true heartbreak of the Marauders, not the betrayal, not the deaths, but the lost chance to speak the truth when it mattered most. Sirius spent 12 years believing he was the reason his friends died. When he learned the truth, it was too late to confront the one person who could explain it, James and Lily. One can only imagine the pain she might have felt, knowing that in her final days, the man they chose to trust was not the one who had been at their side for years. Or perhaps she believed in Peter's innocence, or perhaps she had no say in the matter at all. These are the stories we don't get in the books. These are the wounds between the lines. In the end, maybe Sirius was forgiven too quickly. Not by Harry, but by the memory of James and Lily, by the Order, by Remus. They accepted him back, welcomed him, even loved him. But they never made him confront the truth of that fateful decision, and maybe Sirius himself didn't want to. Maybe forgiveness was easier than the answers. But we, the readers, must ask. Because in a world where silence can kill, understanding matters more than comfort. The Potters may have forgiven Sirius in spirit, but the questions they never asked still echo unanswered in every shadowed corner of the story. Number 23. Lily didn't understand the world she lived in. Lily Evans, with her emerald eyes and fierce intelligence, is often remembered through the golden glow of sacrifice. She is painted in soft hues. The brave mother, the kind friend, the voice of reason. But what if we've been looking at her through the wrong lens? What if, beneath the compassion and the brilliance, Lily harboured a darker fire? Not evil, but fierce. Not cruel, but merciless when necessary. The kind of fire that made her a warrior, not just a martyr. There is a dangerous comfort in reducing Lily to a one-dimensional symbol of love. It allows us to forget that she joined the Order of the Phoenix, a rebel organization engaged in open conflict with one of the most powerful Dark Lords of all time. This was not a knitting circle. This was war. And Lily, at barely 20, took her place on the front lines, not in the shadows, not with hesitation, but as a full-fledged fighter in a deadly underground movement. That alone forces us to rethink the delicate image often associated with her. The Order wasn't a passive society of pacifists. Dumbledore didn't invite people based solely on kindness. He selected witches and wizards who could stand their ground, keep secrets, resist torture, and yes, if needed, kill. Let us not forget what Sirius once said. "We're not playing games here, Harry. This is war." Lily didn't flinch at that reality. She embraced it. That tells us something about her that we don't usually confront. Consider the fact that she remained active in the Order even after Voldemort marked them. She and James became the primary targets, constantly on the run, moving from safe house to safe house under the Fidelius charm. Yet she didn't beg to be spared, didn't retreat from the Order. She doubled down. The woman who loved potions and argued against blood prejudice didn't hide. She resisted. She chose to defy one of the most terrifying forces the wizarding world had ever seen. And she did it knowingly. That kind of choice doesn't come from a gentle flower. It comes from steel. Her capacity for wrath is rarely discussed, but it was there. Snape knew it well. In the Order of the Phoenix, during the pensive scene, we see teenage Lily erupt with fury at Severus. She doesn't scold. She attacks. "I don't need help from filthy little mudbloods like her," he says, and she fires back, "Fine, I won't bother in the future, and I won't miss you, you slimy git." There is venom in her words, the sharpness of someone who does not forgive easily. Her expression in that moment, as described by the text, was not merely hurt. It was cold. This is not the behavior of someone incapable of confrontation. This is someone who draws a line and defends it with every fiber of her being. Even as a teenager, Lily showed the traits of a commander. Her arguments with James were not passive. She never allowed herself to be overrun. She stood firm, especially when it came to her beliefs. When James mocked others, Lily didn't laugh along. She challenged him, not out of politeness, but principle. And that requires inner fire, not just softness. Dumbledore once said it takes a great deal of bravery to stand up to our enemies, but just as much to stand up to our friends. Lily did both. She stood up to Voldemort by joining the Order. She stood up to Snape when he crossed a line. She stood up to James even when the entire school admired him. That kind of consistency, that moral backbone, it doesn't grow out of meekness. It grows out of fury held in balance. It grows out of a belief so deep that one is willing to burn for it. Let's go deeper into her Order days. We don't know many missions she went on, but we do know they were active during the First Wizarding War. Members like Marlene McKinnon, Dorcas Meadows, and Benji Fenwick were all brutally killed. Lily would have known them. She would have seen the cost. And still she stayed. Imagine the mental strength required not just to stay, but to keep fighting when your friends are being murdered one by one. That strength is not born of passivity. It's born of a cold readiness to do what must be done. There's something chillingly brave about the way she died. Voldemort offered her a choice. He was going to kill her baby. He gave her the opportunity to step aside, and she refused. Think about that. Most people would collapse, but not Lily. She stood between the Dark Lord and her son with nothing but her body and her will. In that moment, she didn't cast a spell. She made herself a shield, an act not of surrender, but of defiance. And let us not romanticize that choice into mere love. It was love, yes, but it was also rage, a mother's rage, a lioness defending her cub. It wasn't soft, it was absolute. Voldemort didn't understand it. He mistook it for weakness. But in truth, it was the strongest spell he would ever face. The ancient magic that destroyed him wasn't tenderness, it was ferocity. "You stand, Lily Evans, between me and my aim." And she replied, not with words, but with unmovable resolve. It's easy to forget that Lily grew up in a household where she was considered a freak by her own sister. Petunia's disdain wasn't subtle, it was brutal. Lily learned early that the world could be cruel. And instead of shrinking, she blossomed. She turned rejection into power. Even as a child, she stood tall. Her response to Petunia's bitterness wasn't to become bitter herself. It was to become better. But make no mistake, she didn't forget. And that capacity to remember, to never forgive injustice, is what made her dangerous to Voldemort. She was not like the Death Eaters, vengeful and cruel, but she was just as relentless. She didn't give up on Snape until the last possible moment. She believed in him, but only up to the point where he proved unworthy of her trust. And then she shut the door. Forever. There was no second chance, no forgiveness. That's not cold, it's clarity. That's someone who's made hard decisions before. Think about her friendship with Mary MacDonald. When Sirius Black performed that dark prank with Snape and the Whomping Willow, Lily wasn't afraid to confront him, even though Sirius was popular and dangerous. She wasn't afraid to call out James either. She never played politics in school. She simply followed her internal code, and woe to those who broke it. That's not just moral integrity, that's command. That's leadership forged in fire. Even the marauders, with all their arrogance and cleverness, admired her, feared her even. James pursued her for years, and not just because she was beautiful. He recognized something formidable in her, something that matched his own fire. He was reckless, but she was precise. Where he was wild, she was controlled, but they were equals in spirit. James wasn't drawn to someone fragile. He was drawn to a partner. Let's talk about wandless magic. Lily was talented in it, not a common skill even among skilled wizards. Slughorn admired her abilities deeply. He even said, "I don't mean to be rude, but you did remind me rather of your mother when you arrived at Hogwarts. Lily, bright, vivacious, charming, and very gifted." Slughorn's words weren't empty flattery. He knew talent when he saw it, and Lily had enough of it to terrify even the best of her peers. Talent like that isn't just academic, it's dangerous in war. When the Death Eaters began hunting Muggle-borns, Lily didn't run. She didn't change her name or hide her blood status. She didn't try to negotiate or go underground. She took up arms, metaphorically and perhaps literally. She risked everything. She put her life on the line day after day. Her house was a fortress. Her friends were dying, and still she chose to remain in the fight. That kind of decision isn't fueled by gentleness, it's fueled by an iron will. In another life, Lily could have been an aura. She had the moral compass, the intelligence, the talent, and the spine. She might have even been a leader in the ministry, someone like Amelia Bones. Another strong woman who took no prisoners, but instead she chose family. She chose Harry. Yet even in that choice she remained a fighter. She raised Harry for 15 months in hiding, always looking over her shoulder, always ready, always defiant. It's time we see Lily Evans for who she truly was. Not a fragile flower, but a sword in disguise. Not a soft voice in the background, but a storm held in check. Her love was mighty, yes, but it wasn't meek. Her kindness didn't come from cowardice, but from confrontation with darkness. She knew exactly what the world could be, and she chose to fight for the light, not with naivety, but with teeth. If she had lived, she would have been one of the greatest members of the Order, perhaps even its leader, standing beside or after Dumbledore. She had the heart, the brilliance, and the fury. She wouldn't have backed down from war. She already didn't. So let us remember her not only as the mother who died, but as the witch who fought. Lily Potter, a force to be reckoned with in life as in death. Number 24. James never admitted his mistakes. The memory spilled from the pensieve in silvery threads, showing a teenage boy hanging upside down, robes flapping above his head, a crowd of onlookers laughing. Sirius Black grinned with mischief, wand lazily pointed. And James Potter, smug, confident, wand in hand, spoke casually. "Who wants to see me take off Snively's pants?" The scene in Order of the Phoenix is brief, but it stains everything. For a moment, Harry watches his father not as a hero, but as a bully. Readers are told, through Sirius and Lupin, that James grew out of that arrogance. "Your father was the best man I ever knew," Sirius says. Lupin adds that James matured, changed, and became a good man. But even as they speak these words, something lingers, an unspoken discomfort. Because James never says it himself. He never looks into the eyes of Severus Snape and says, "I'm sorry." He never admits to Harry that he made mistakes. Not once does he acknowledge the hurt he caused. Some fans argue that James changed after his 5th year, that he became more responsible, less arrogant, but what do we actually see? In Deathly Hallows, Harry visits the old house in Godric's Hollow, the house where James died. In the room where it happened, James's wand lies somewhere silent forever. His voice is absent in the story. He never returns as a ghost. He leaves behind no journal, no letters, no confession. His image is shaped entirely through the memories and opinions of others, people who loved him too much to be impartial. The pensieve is the only place we see James for who he truly was, unfiltered. When Harry confronts Sirius about the memory, Sirius deflects, embarrassed. "We were 15, he exclaims, as if youth is a justification for cruelty. But the fact remains, James humiliated Snape, not once, not in isolation, but as part of a pattern. "I wouldn't go out with you if it was a choice between you and the giant squid," Lily says sharply to James. "You make me sick." Even Lily, the girl James loved, saw his flaws. She was unimpressed by his swagger and his treatment of others. In that same memory, she defends Snape. "Leave him alone," she yells, pushing through the crowd. She doesn't see James as heroic. And the truth is, he wasn't, not then. What made her change her mind? We are told James matured. But where is the proof? It's not in his words, because James never speaks of the past. He never tells Harry I did wrong. He never writes Snape a letter, never sends an apology through Dumbledore. Even after the two joined the Order of the Phoenix and fought on the same side, James never bridges the chasm he helped create. Snape goes to Dumbledore asking him to protect Lily, not James. That detail is telling. Snape is willing to die for her. But he does not ask for James's safety. Why? Because even in adulthood, there is no trust, no peace, no apology. When Harry sees Snape's worst memory, it's not just a moment of humiliation, it's a window into a life. A boy tormented not just for being poor or awkward, but for daring to exist in a world where James Potter was king. "You're lucky Evans was there, Snivellus," James sneers. There's no kindness in the way he treats him. And after that memory, the silence is louder than any words James could have spoken, because it never comes. No redemption arc, no confrontation, no remorse. People defend James, citing his bravery, his sacrifice. Yes, he died protecting Harry, but heroism in one context does not erase cruelty in another. James may have died a hero, but he lived part of his youth as a tormentor. The question isn't whether he changed, but whether he understood. Did he grow from that past, or simply leave it behind? Maturity without reflection is not growth, it's avoidance. In contrast, consider Snape, a man who made terrible choices but who is constantly confronted with them. He is forced to face his guilt over and over every day. Dumbledore holds him accountable. Lily's death haunts him. And Snape changes, not just in actions, but in self-awareness. "I have spied for you and lied for you, put myself in mortal danger for you," Snape tells Dumbledore. His life becomes a penance. He suffers and he grows. But James, he vanishes from the narrative before such self-reflection can occur. We're left with a version of him crafted by those who idolized him, Sirius, who never grew up, and Lupin, who clung to the golden memories of their youth. Neither of them ever truly condemns what James did to Snape. They excuse it, joke about it, minimize it. "Snape deserved it," Sirius once mutters. But did he? Is that justice? Snape's flaws are real, his bitterness, his cruelty, his allegiance with Death Eaters. But at 15 he was a boy like any other, vulnerable and insecure. James used his power, his popularity, his skill to hurt him. And that damage never healed, because the wound was never acknowledged. When Dumbledore speaks of James, he does so with careful language. He was a brave and loyal friend. But even Dumbledore never says James was kind, never says he apologized, never says he made peace with his enemies. And if anyone would have known, it would be Dumbledore. If an apology existed, Dumbledore would have delivered it, but he never does. Lily's shift from disdain to love is left unexplained. We are told that James stopped hexing people in the corridors, that he became a head boy. But being a leader doesn't make you good, it makes you respectable, and respectability can be achieved without remorse. The transformation is told, not shown. He grew up, Sirius insists, but what does that mean? It means James got what he wanted. He won Lily, he became a father, he fought for the Order, he died protecting his son, but he never sat across from Severus Snape and said, "I was wrong." He never asked, "What did I do to you?" And maybe that's the real tragedy. Not just the bullying, but the absence of closure. Snape's life is defined by loss of Lily, of dignity, of forgiveness. James walks off stage, noble and untarnished, leaving others to pick up the pieces. Harry burdened with the truth, Snape trapped in bitterness, Lily dead between two men who never made peace. In the Forest of Dean, as Harry walks to his death, he summons the resurrection stone. His parents appear. James is smiling, proud, his voice calm. "You'll stay with me?" Harry asks. "Until the very end," James says. But even then, James says nothing about the past. No wisdom, no regrets, just presence. And it's not enough. Harry names his son after Snape, the bravest man I ever knew. He forgives the man who hated him, who made his life difficult, who called his mother a mudblood, because Snape changed, because Snape loved and protected and bled for that love. What would James have done if he had lived? Would he have ever said the words, or would he have continued pretending nothing ever happened? The silence of James Potter echoes. Not because he was the worst character in the series, but because he was never forced to look in the mirror, never asked to kneel before the people he hurt and acknowledge his role. Redemption requires admission. And James, for all his courage, never once said, I'm sorry. So the next time someone says James grew up, ask them, how do we know? What did he do to prove it? Where are the moments of reflection, the acts of restitution? Because being a father, being a soldier, being a husband, those are roles. They don't erase the past, they only complicate it. James Potter was many things: talented, brave, loyal, charismatic, but he was also arrogant, reckless, and at times cruel. And the truth is, he never answered for that cruelty. He died before he could, and maybe that's why, even after all these years, the wound still feels open. Not because James was a villain, but because he never truly became a man who faced his own shadows. And in a world where memories can be bottled, where ghosts walk among the living, and truth hides behind charm, his silence speaks louder than any spell. Number 25. Lily might have used Snape, one of the most painful theories in the Harry Potter fandom, and certainly one of the most provocative, suggests that Lily Evans, Harry Potter's beloved mother and symbol of maternal sacrifice, might have used Severus Snape. It's an idea that unsettles fans because it forces us to reconsider everything we thought we knew about one of the story's most cherished relationships. Severus Snape loved Lily Evans from childhood, and his devotion to her is portrayed as one of the few constants in his turbulent life. But what if Lily knew exactly how he felt and chose to keep him close not out of friendship, but for something darker? Snape's love for Lily was not subtle. From the moment he met her as a child by the riverbank in Spinner's End, his heart was hers. He was awkward, intense, and clearly captivated. Lily, by contrast, was warm and curious, drawn to the strange, pale boy with greasy hair and a mysterious knowledge of magic. In The Prince's Tale, we witness that first meeting. You're a witch," Snape tells her. "I've been watching you for a while, but there's nothing wrong with it. My mum's one, and I'm a wizard." Lily didn't recoil. She smiled. and thus began a bond that would stretch over years, deep, intense, and ultimately tragic. Lily's behavior in those early years, seen through the lens of their evolving relationship, is where the theory gains its unsettling momentum. She was popular, kind, and clever, qualities that made her stand out at Hogwarts. Severus, in contrast, was an outcast from the start. Bullied, sneered at, and drawn to the shadows of Slytherin House, he was everything Lily should have grown apart from. But she didn't. Not for a long time. Even as Severus began to associate with future Death Eaters, Avery, Mulciber, and others, Lily remained his friend. She defended him. She tolerated the darkness around him. Why? That's the question. Why did Lily stay close to Severus, even as he grew more dangerous? According to some fans, the answer is chilling. Because she liked the attention, because she liked being adored, unconditionally, obsessively, because she knew that Severus would never leave her side, no matter how far he sank into the murky waters of dark magic. And that kind of loyalty, twisted and painful as it may be, can be intoxicating. This is where the theory touches something deeply human and uncomfortable. We all know people who hold on to someone simply because they like being needed. Lily may have seen Snape as her anchor, a constant reminder that she was special, important, central in someone's life. It's not a crime, perhaps, but is it kindness? Or is it quiet manipulation? The moment Lily walks away from Severus is telling. It's not after he becomes more involved with the dark arts. It's not even when he begins calling Muggle-borns mudbloods in private. No, it's only after he publicly calls her a mudblood. "I didn't mean it," he shouts at her in The Prince's Tale, but the damage is done. Lily's reply is cold, final. "I can't pretend anymore. You've chosen your way, I've chosen mine." And with that, years of friendship end in a single moment. Coldly, irrevocably. That's what makes some readers pause. Could someone who truly loved her best friend end it so completely in one breath? If she had left him earlier, if she had walked away when Mulciber hexed Mary MacDonald and Snape defended it, perhaps it would have been easier to believe she was simply heartbroken, disillusioned. But she didn't. She forgave him again and again, until the insult was personal, not ideological, personal. That distinction has led many fans to speculate, did Lily only care as long as Severus's darkness didn't touch her? Consider how she reacts to his growing involvement with darker students. "They're nothing but Death Eater wannabes," she tells him. "You're becoming just like them." But even after those words, she still sits by his side. She still accepts his company. Was she hoping to save him? Was she trying to keep him from falling completely into darkness? Or was she enjoying being the shining light in someone's gloomy world? Snape's love wasn't fleeting or naive. It persisted even after her death, even after she chose James Potter, even after Harry, her son, bore the face of the man Snape hated most. "Always," he tells Dumbledore when asked if he still loves her after all this time. That one word, always, has become iconic, romantic, tragic, but also perhaps unsettling, because it wasn't healthy, it wasn't mutual, it was worship. And Lily, clever as she was, had to have known. We also need to consider how Lily spoke of Severus before the split. When James Potter taunted him, she defended him. "Leave him alone," she snapped. "He doesn't need help from filthy little mudbloods like her." Snape had cried in rage, and Lily was stunned. But again, this was after years of tolerance, years of choosing to stay close. Why? Did she hope he would change? Or did she enjoy being the one person he couldn't live without? The line between genuine compassion and emotional manipulation can be thin. It's possible Lily stayed because she hoped Severus could be redeemed, but that theory only works if we ignore the deeper, darker possibilities. What if Lily knew, truly knew, that she was everything to him and simply didn't want to give up that power? Power, that's the word that stings most in this discussion, because to be the sun in someone's sky is a form of power, especially when that person has so little else. Snape had nothing, not love, not warmth, not belonging, except for Lily. She was his star, his north, and she let him orbit her for years, until the moment he failed her personally. Then, and only then, she shut the door. To be clear, Lily did not owe Snape her love. No one does. Friendship cannot be a transaction, but the question isn't whether she owed him anything. It's whether she took something from him, something emotional, something deep, while giving little in return. And if she did, was that kindness or cruelty? In the end, Lily married James Potter, the same boy who bullied Severus relentlessly. She had her reasons. James matured, became a leader, a fighter. But from Snape's perspective, it was a double betrayal. Not only did Lily leave him, she chose his tormentor. And yet still, Snape protected her son, fought for him, died for him. That kind of loyalty isn't born in a vacuum. It's the legacy of an all-consuming love. Some fans argue that Lily couldn't have known how deep Severus's feelings ran. But that theory falls apart under scrutiny. Severus wasn't subtle, his obsession was clear, and Lily was anything but oblivious. She was one of the smartest witches of her age. If we believe she didn't know, we diminish her intelligence, and that's not fair to her. In truth, this theory doesn't aim to vilify Lily Evans, it aims to humanize her, to suggest that even the brightest lights can cast shadows, that even heroes can have flaws. Lily was kind, but was she always fair? She was brilliant, but was she always honest? These are hard questions, but in a story where love and betrayal are constant themes, they must be asked. And what of Snape? Did he ever see the truth? Did he ever realize that his beloved Lily may have kept him close for comfort, not out of love? It's possible. But it doesn't matter. His love was absolute. He clung to it even when it hurt him, even when it defined every bitter choice he made, because some people love not for what they receive, but for the idea of love itself. The theory that Lily used Snape isn't about blaming her, it's about examining the grey areas, the spaces where love becomes dependency, where kindness becomes control. It's about understanding that even in the wizarding world people are complex, messy, capable of both great compassion and quiet selfishness. J.K. Rowling never confirms this theory, nor does she deny it. She gives us pieces, glimpses, and leaves us to decide, was Lily a saint or simply a girl navigating friendship, power, and pain like anyone else? The truth perhaps lies somewhere in between, where love lives, where heartbreak lingers, where stories, both magical and human, are born. Number 26. James joined the war for fame. He was always the golden boy. From the very first time James Potter stepped onto the Hogwarts Express, his presence turned heads. Tall for his age, untamed black hair, and a confident grin that seemed to promise both charm and chaos, he was impossible to ignore. By third year, he was a Quidditch star. By fifth, he was head boy. By seventh, he was a legend. But legends, as history has often shown, are not always forged out of selflessness. Sometimes they're crafted from the irresistible desire to be remembered. Sirius Black once said, "Your father was the best at everything. He could fly as well as anyone I've ever seen." And he knew it. There was admiration in his voice, but there was something else too. An edge, a memory. Because even Sirius, the most loyal of friends, knew that James Potter never stepped into the spotlight reluctantly. He craved it. It thrilled him. And when the war against Voldemort began, it offered a new kind of arena. One bigger, darker, and more dangerous than Hogwarts, but also one with a far grander stage. The Order of the Phoenix was not for the faint of heart. Albus Dumbledore recruited those willing to risk everything. Lily joined, drawn by her unshakable sense of right and wrong. Remus joined, hoping to prove he was more than the monster the world believed him to be. And James? James joined with fire in his eyes, eager to fight, to lead, to win. Of course he hated Voldemort, of course he believed in the cause, but was that truly the only reason? At Hogwarts, James's thirst for admiration had already shaped his identity. He strutted through the corridors like he owned them, flipping his hair and hexing Severus Snape for sport. In the Order of the Phoenix, Snape spat, "Your father was a swine." Harsh words, but not baseless. James had many virtues, but humility was never among them. And when you grow up always being told you're exceptional, perhaps it becomes easy to believe that greatness is not just a duty, but your destiny. The war gave James a chance to become the hero he'd always played at being. It was one thing to save a snitch, another to save lives. But maybe, just maybe, for someone like James, both acts came from the same place, the desire to be seen, admired, applauded. He was so brave, people would say later. He gave everything. And he did. But glory, too, has its pull. And James, ever the shining star, couldn't resist. Lily saw more in him than the showman. She fell in love with the man beneath the bravado, the man who stayed up late, perfecting protection spells, the man who, when Harry was born, cradled him as if the world had shrunk to the size of that tiny heartbeat. Yet even she once told him, in the Order of the Phoenix, "You think the world revolves around you." That wasn't a lie. It was a truth she had to challenge in him, a truth he eventually tried to outgrow. But when the war began, he was 20, barely out of school. He had known nothing of death, of true sacrifice. The Marauders had been invincible. They broke rules, bent the world to their will, and laughed in the face of consequences. The war changed that. Friends died, families disappeared, yet James still ran toward the flames, wand raised, cloak billowing, every bit the mythic hero he'd always imagined himself becoming. Did he ever question it? Did he ever wonder if his fight was about more than victory? In quiet moments, did he see the faces of those he couldn't save, or only hear the applause in his mind? There's no record of James ever discussing fear. Unlike Remus, who doubted himself constantly, or Sirius, who masked pain with recklessness, James carried the war like it was another Quidditch match. Another chance to be brilliant. In one of the few photographs that survived, taken at a rare Order gathering, James stands in the center. He's grinning, wand in hand, as though daring the darkness to come. Behind him, Lily looks weary. The war had worn her down already, but James burned brighter than ever. Perhaps that photo says more than any quote. He's not just ready for battle, he's posing for it. Even Albus Dumbledore, ever wise, once warned against pride. In the Goblet of Fire, he tells Harry, "It is our choices and that show what we truly are, far more than our abilities." James had both, great ability and the choice to use it. But his motivation, like so many in youth, was complex. Glory is not inherently evil, but it is seductive. And when wrapped in the banner of righteousness, it's even harder to recognize for what it truly is. When he died, wandless, defending his family, James finally made a choice that had nothing to do with being seen. Voldemort offered him a chance to step aside, but James shouted, "Lily, take Harry and go." That was no performance. That was real, raw, heroic. But that was the end of the road. And roads don't tell us where they began. Because before the nursery, before the heartbreak, there was a boy who once laughed too loud, dueled too hard, and joined a war with stars in his eyes, not for money, not for bloodlust, but for the shining spotlight that comes from doing the right thing and being celebrated for it. Is that so rare? Is that so wrong? Perhaps not, but it's not the pristine, selfless heroism the history books love to portray. The truth is, heroism is rarely pure. People are not made of one thing. James was brave, loyal, daring, but he was also vain and ambitious. He wanted to make a mark. And in the dark days of Voldemort's rise, there was no greater way to make one than by joining the Order. Dying in battle was tragic, but also immortalizing. Peter Pettigrew, the traitor, once looked up to James like a god. "James wouldn't have died for me," he later whined to Sirius, but Peter's jealousy held a kernel of truth. James was adored. He was who the others wanted to be. And maybe that's why Peter turned, because in James's glow he always felt like a shadow. Heroes inspire. But sometimes they also blind. In the end, what matters is not just that James fought, but why. And the answer, like all truths, lies somewhere in the middle, between courage and charisma, between sacrifice and status, between doing what's right and wanting the world to know you did. And what of Harry, the boy who bore the legacy of the man he never met? Harry, too, sought justice, but he never wanted fame. "I don't want to be special," he told Dumbledore. That was the difference. Harry's burden was thrust upon him. James, at least in the beginning, chose his fight. Perhaps that is the most telling contrast. James flew toward the war. Harry had to be dragged. And yet both stood tall in the end. Both refused to bow to darkness, but only one of them ever had posters on common room walls saying, "He's a legend." Was James wrong to want glory? No, he was human, he was young. And when the time came, he gave everything. But the story we tell of James the Noble, James the Flawless, is incomplete. He wasn't just a war hero, he was a boy who wanted to be great. And sometimes in the pursuit of greatness, even the best among us fight for more than just the cause. They fight to be remembered. And James Potter, brilliant and flawed, is remembered still. Number 27, their sacrifice wasn't that unique. There's a moment in every reader's journey through the Harry Potter saga when they pause at the photograph of James and Lily Potter, smiling and waving from behind a glass frame, and feel the sting of loss as if they too knew them. Their story, we're told, is the beginning of everything, a heroic act of love that stopped the darkest wizard of all time and saved their son. But when you begin to peel back the shimmering veil of myth and emotion, a harder truth begins to settle. Their sacrifice was not unique, their fate was not isolated, and the world they died in was soaked with blood, bravery, and forgotten names. It was October 31st, 1981, when James and Lily Potter were murdered. Voldemort found them at Godric's Hollow, betrayed by someone they trusted. James died first, wandless, unprepared, trying to buy Lily and Harry a few more seconds. Lily died next, standing between the Dark Lord and her son. The killing curse rebounded, Voldemort vanished, and Harry became the boy who lived. But in the weeks, months, and years before that night, there were countless others who made the same ultimate sacrifice. The Potters were not the only ones who chose love over safety, resistance over surrender. Theirs is simply the story that survived. Consider the McKinnons, Marlene McKinnon and her entire family. The McKinnons, the Bones, the Prewetts, all of them murdered by Voldemort and his Death Eaters, Alastor Moody reminds Harry during a meeting of the Order of the Phoenix. These weren't just names. Marlene was a fierce duelist, a pure blood who openly opposed Voldemort's ideology. Her murder wasn't clean. Death Eaters made an example of her. No infant survived to tell her tale. No myth was born from her ashes. Then there were Fabian and Gideon Prewett, brothers to Molly Weasley. Uncles Fred and George never got to meet. Fabian and Gideon walked like heroes, Moody says, voice low. Took 5 Death Eaters to kill them. They died together, wands in hand, backs to the wall. but their deaths weren't sung through generations. Their photos didn't wave from newspaper covers. Their only legacy lies in the mischievous spark of two red-headed twins who never knew where their spark came from. Dorcas Meadows was another. She was murdered personally by Voldemort. That fact alone should have etched her name into magical history. She had fought long and hard, had evaded death more than once, but in the end she was hunted down and killed by the man she defied. She was a good witch, Dumbledore had once said quietly, and she knew what she was risking. But even in Dumbledore's memory, she was just a fleeting name. And let us not forget Edgar Bones, a high-ranking Auror, brother to Amelia Bones. His whole family was slaughtered in one night. Why? Because he stood up, because he didn't bow, because he believed the ministry should be more than a puppet show. And for that, his name disappeared into classified Auror reports, his deeds whispered in grief behind closed doors. In every corner of the wizarding world, similar tales unfolded. The war was not kind. It didn't spare the brave. These people were not any less worthy than the Potters. They simply didn't have a son who lived. It's a cruel but undeniable truth. Had Harry died that night, the Potters' story would have ended with a whimper, tucked away in the files of the Department of Magical Law Enforcement. Lily's love would still have been powerful, but unrecorded. James's last stand, still valiant but meaningless in the greater narrative. It was Harry's survival, and the miraculous echo of a curse that couldn't kill, that turned two young parents into eternal martyrs. Even Dumbledore, in all his wisdom, contributed to the elevation of their myth. You are protected, in short, by your ability to love, he tells Harry years later. The only protection that can possibly work against the lure of power like Voldemort's. Lily's act became a symbol, a pillar of magical theory, a moment taught in classrooms. But whose love was greater, Lily's or Mary MacDonald's, who smuggled Muggle-born children to safety and died when snatchers raided her home? The problem with legends is that they flatten complexity. They polish the edges, make one story the focus while dozens fade away. James and Lily were young, beautiful, talented. They were pure-hearted, beloved by their peers, members of the Order. Their son became a symbol, and symbols need simplicity, tragedy, light defeating darkness. But if you remove the veil, you see that Lily wasn't the only mother who screamed her child's name before dying, and James wasn't the only man who threw himself in front of a curse for someone he loved. The world was full of them. Take Emmeline Vance. She was elegant, composed, brave. She was murdered outside her home, not because of what she did, but because she refused to be afraid. The Order lost a good witch, Kingsley Shacklebolt had murmured at the time. But no statues were raised in her name, no songs were sung, or Benji Fenwick, who was literally blasted into pieces by Death Eaters. Moody had collected what was left of him, a single arm. He went down fighting, was all Moody said, because in war there isn't time for mourning, only for marching forward. Why then are the Potters revered? Because we met them through Harry's eyes, because we saw the photograph on the mantel, because we imagined what might have been, because Harry's love for them, for the idea of them, was so strong that it became our love too. But what of the unnamed, the ones buried in unmarked graves, whose families fled, whose stories were never told? For every Lily Potter, how many witches died unknown in burned-out cottages? For every James, how many wizards fell in alleyways without a wand in hand, caught unaware? It is haunting to consider, and necessary. For in understanding this truth, we do not diminish the Potter's sacrifice. We contextualize it. We recognize the collective grief, the shared resistance, the full scope of what the First Wizarding War cost the magical world. And perhaps no example better illustrates this than the story of Caradoc Dearborn. He was a devoted member of the Order, and he disappeared, vanished, no body, no trace. Dumbledore suspected he had been killed, but no one ever confirmed it. His family waited, then gave up, then pretended to forget. But every year, on the day he vanished, his sister would light a candle. There is something tragically poetic in that, the way silence can be heavier than death. So when we speak of James and Lily as the great sacrifice, the turning point, the heart of the story, we must remember that they were simply the sacrifice that fate allowed to become famous, not more noble, not more painful, just more visible. Harry, for all his fame, understood this too. By the time he stood in the Forbidden Forest, wand dropped, ready to die, he didn't just think of his parents, he thought of Remus, of Tonks, of Fred, of Dobby, of those who died not for prophecy but for principle. "You'll stay with me?" he asks his parents' shades, and they say yes. But what of those who had no one left to summon them? The beauty of the Potter myth is in its simplicity, but the tragedy of the war is in its enormity. And those two things will always live side by side, one remembered, one forgotten. "Remember Cedric Diggory," Dumbledore said, years later, in a different war. "Remember, if the time should come when you have to make a choice between what is right and what is easy." Cedric was not a casualty of prophecy. He was just a boy, caught in a storm he didn't create, but he died anyway. And in that he became another echo of the truth. Voldemort didn't only kill those who threatened him, he killed to prove he could. So, yes, James and Lily's deaths were heartbreaking, but they were not the only heartbreak. They were part of a constellation, a tragic sky of names, some written in stars, others lost in shadow. And while Harry's scar became the emblem of resistance, others bore scars no one could see. And those stories of the quiet, the anonymous, the unremembered deserve to be told too. Because if we only mourn the famous, we forget the cost. If we only speak of one sacrifice, we silence 100 others. And if we forget the real weight of war, we make it easier to let it happen again. The Potters were brave, but so were the McKinnons, the Bones, the Meadows, the Prewetts. They all fought, they all died, and they all mattered.